Good day. I'm Robert Fantina.
And this is Khawaja Hammad Akbar, and you're listening to Geopolitics, exploring myths versus realities. Each week, we interview distinguished experts from the international arena from around the world to explain and clarify the most pressing international issues of the day.
Our guest today is Cindy Sheehan. Cindy is an American peace activist whose public opposition to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan began after her son was killed in Iraq in 2004. Cindy's vigil outside US President George W. Bush's ranch in Texas in 2005 received international media coverage and established her as one of the most visible figures in the anti-war movement at that time. Cindy's first book, Not One More Mother's Child, written in 2005, recounts the events at Camp Casey, the site she established outside Bush's ranch. In her next book, Peace Mom, the following year, she told the story of her earlier life and her path to political activism. She's the host of the podcast Cindy Sheehan Soapbox and the videocast Sheila. Both can be found at Cindy Sheehan Soapbox Substack. Welcome, Cindy.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me, gentlemen.
Cindy, I'll ask the first question here. Please tell us about your journey as a peace activist. We know that the tragic loss of your son must have been the first trigger. But what were the other contributing factors to your journey, or that motivated you to work or become a peace activist?
Thank you. So it's almost 19 years since Casey was killed in Iraq on April 4th, 2004. But I grew up during the Vietnam War, and I was very, I would say probably the US's war against the people of Vietnam. And I was very opposed to that war, even though like 1967, I was only 10 years old when it was really escalating to a fever pitch. And so I saw the anti-war movement at the time. I was very sympathetic towards them. And then I have always been my whole life against the wars and against violence. And actually Casey was too, and he was a very devout Catholic, and he joined the military for economic reasons, which, is very tragic here in the United States, where our children have to choose between lifelong debt, like my oldest daughter, which is of course preferable. My oldest daughter who got her master's degree, which of course is preferable to, being killed in a war, in a US imperialist war. So after he was killed, I just really felt like I didn't have much else to lose. So I just went very, I using the terms of war, scorched earth against war and against US imperialism. And so, like you said, in 05, August of 05, some of us went to Crawford, Texas to confront George Bush, the president who was on vacation at the time. And I had heard him say that the troops dying in Iraq were dying for a noble cause, but he didn't define that, and the press didn't ask him that. So I thought, you know what, I have a voice. I'm gonna go to Crawford and ask him. So then I was asked, what are you going to do if he won't meet with you to answer the question? I said, I guess I'll just stay there until he does. And so that started almost month-long camp in Crawford, Texas in August, which, is I know it's not the worst place to be in August, because I've been other places in August that are worse, but it's not a very hospitable location, you got the fire ants, you got the heat, you got the humidity. I had all these right-wing war supporters who came out to attack the camp on a daily basis. So that's basically how it all started.
Okay, and it's been quite a journey for you, I know.
Right.
Cindy, right now, the U.S. is. Khawaja, did you have a follow-up?
No, please go ahead.
Okay. Right now, as we all know, the U.S. is constantly threatening Iran, and the U.S. is saying that it will never allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. This raises several questions. How can the U.S. government, the only nation to ever have used nuclear weapons, and the nation with the largest stockpile of such weapons on the planet, feel it can determine what other nations can and cannot have nuclear weapons? How does the U.S. decide this? Your thoughts, please.
Well, the U.S., of course, is a psychotic hegemon in the world, and it thinks that it can be the puppet master to every nation and can tell other nations what to do and what not to do. And we also know that Israel has hundreds of nuclear weapons, and the U.S. doesn't even regulate those. I'm so sorry. My voice is very gruff today. But the U.S. doesn't even regulate Israel's weapons, and then they won't even allow Iran to develop nuclear power for its citizens. So, and there's been many weapons inspectors that went there saying no, Iran is enriching uranium for power, not for weapons, but it doesn't matter to the United States. And the United States is always very hypocritical. The vice president was just, I think, in Munich saying that Putin committed crimes against humanity. And, the United States commits crimes against humanity on a daily basis, at home and abroad. So that's just their hypocritical posturing, of course.
Mm-hmm. Just
Cindy,
to follow up
Robert, if you don't mind, let me
Sure.
have a follow-up question. Cindy,
Sure,
you're talking about the hypocritical role of United States and gave an example of Russia. But in this global power game, don't you think in these in superpowers game, the smaller countries are the underdeveloping countries, or the developing countries are suffering more, and at the name of the security, they're suffering. So what are your thoughts about it? Because we can't single-handedly criticize United States only, because there are other superpowers. They are competing with US for the sake of power or for the sake of global hegemon.
Well, of course, the so-called third world or developing countries have been suffering greatly because of imperialism, the expenditure of money on weapons and nuclear arsenals and things like that. But also Russia and China, the other big nuclear armed countries, have also done a lot of good work around the world with big projects, dams, roads, other kind of infrastructure projects around the globe. And I feel like, since I live in the United States, and the United States, to me, like Martin Luther King Jr. said in 1967, is the biggest purveyor of violence in the world, I think it's up to me to be hypercritical of what my own psychotic nation is doing.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the United States, it seems like under Biden, who I never thought there would be a worse president than George Bush, but Biden certainly is vying for that position, is provoking Russia, especially in Ukraine, which I think we're going to cover today. But then there's provocation to China. So does Biden actually think it can fight a two-front war against two nuclear powers without provoking global nuclear annihilation? To me, I woke up at 3 o'clock this morning. And so I've been up for like almost 6 hours. And just like everything is just so overwhelming right now. It's just really hard to not be very hyper aware, and also very hyper concerned about what the United States seems to be provoking.
Right.
back in the 60s, there was an expression, if you're not worried, you're not paying attention. I think that's very true today.
I think
Uh,
it's if you're not outraged.
Oh, you're not
If you're not
outraged. Not
outraged,
outraged,
you're not paying
right,
attention.
right, yeah,
I don't have a problem with outrage, that's for sure.
yeah. Cindy, you mentioned Israel and Israel's nuclear weapons and the fact that the U.S. doesn't regulate them at all, and yet the U.S. does give Israel $4 billion a year in foreign aid. We talked about the violations of international law that the U.S. is committing, and that, of course, and Israel commits on a daily basis also. Regarding, again, just for a moment, the U.S. hostility toward Iran, how much of that do you think is done to please Israel? And how do you view the future regarding a possible war against Iran, either by the United States or Israel, or both?
Well, we know that Israel has already been attacking Iran, attacking so-called nuclear sites, killing atomic, nuclear physicists and things like that. Israel, did I say Iran? I meant Israel. Israel has recently attacked Lebanon, and they've been bombing Damascus. So it's very, and we know that before Bush Jr. came into office, he's not really a junior, but the second George Bush came into office, that there was a thing written called the Project for a New American Century, and it outlined several existential threats to Israel, and one of them was Iran. So every country that the PNAC outlined, Syria, Libya, Iraq, and I'm not sure, and Iran has been already decimated, but Iran has long been, and I think a lot of the foreign policy in the Middle East is, of course, not all of it, but a big motivation is to keep that paranoid apartheid state of Israel, make them feel more safe in the region. And like you said, billions of dollars of our tax money go to Israel. Now billions are going to the Zelenskys in Ukraine. So a lot of it is about Israel. A lot of it is about profit. A lot of it is about resource control. And I think the only reason that we're not at war with Iran right now is because Iran has shown incredible restraint. After their ports get closed, when Trump was president, they assassinated a beloved national figure, General Soleimani, and I think Iran is always that thing hanging over, that sword of Damocles that's been hanging over our heads for years now, especially since 9/11, when they've had this program to destroy the Middle East. And so that's always a possibility, of course.
Excuse me. With do you want to go on? Do you want to ask the next?
Yeah, the question is that, Cindy, you were talking about the Israel and Iran. When you see the possibility of a war between Israel and Iran, that will have severe implications on the global security overall. So how you see the possibility? Because as a peace activist, you must be welcoming peace or advocating for peace, but in realistic means, the probability of happening a war is more than the chances of peace existing in the region.
I don't think the probability of a war with Iran is very likely right now at the moment. And I think it's because the US is overextended in other places. And we've seen that the United States doesn't really involve itself in wars where it might lose. And so Israel and the United States would have to go like scorched earth if they wanted to defeat Iran, I believe. And I don't believe that that is in the best interest of either country, of any of the three countries. So I don't think the possibility is, at the moment, there's more concerning places on the globe where the US is at war or perhaps planning on going to war.
I think also the US is trying to seize the narrative, as always, and saying that Iran is being unreasonable, won't come back to the bargaining table. It was the US that violated the JCPOA, and
Mhm.
Iran showed, as you mentioned, great restraint for a full year afterwards by maintaining their commitments, even though they were getting no benefits. So it isn't Iran that's being unreasonable. It's the United States, as always, that's being unreasonable. But
Well,
US,
can we say also, we also have to, I'm sorry, we also have
okay.
to emphasize the sanctions. The
Mhm.
sanctions against Iran are pretty devastating. I'm in regular contact with people in Iran, and I do a lot with their was it press TV?
Press TV, yes. Mhm.
Yeah. So I do a lot with their press TV. So the sanctions are pretty horrible right now, and so. But I think, as with Cuba, that has had a blockade and sanctions for decades. I think it makes the people stronger. And it doesn't make the people stronger against their leadership. It makes their people stronger against countries like Israel and the United States. So the sanctions, a lot of times people say sanctions are an act of war, but then there's so much economic strife that there's very little chance of those countries actually going to war against the superpower that is sanctioning them.
I agree. The sanctions issued by the United States and other countries against Iran are hurting the people of Iran, but they know it's not their government. They know it is
Right.
this foreign that's hurting them. And remember, was it Madeleine Albright, when she was Secretary of State, was asked if she was told that about 500,000 Iraqi children had died due to U.S. sanctions, and
Mhm.
she was asked, "Do you think that was worth it?" And she said, "Yes, that was worth it."
Mhm.
So this is the U.S. government mindset, and that hasn't
Yeah.
changed to this day.
That's a pathetic mindset.
It's awful. It's just it's beyond comprehension. How can a human, anyone, deny the humanity of 500,000 children for political
I
gain?
don't know, perhaps she's not human.
There's a possibility.
She's some kind of lizard person. And, I think that there's some validity, not that they're really lizard, but they don't really actually have a human soul that connects with other human souls. Whatever, like, you religious or irreligious or whatever context you put this into, these people, these mass murderers, it seems like they have no humanity. So they
Mhm.
can't connect with other people's humanities.
Mhm. Which makes sense. It's frightening, very frightening.
Mhm. It is. That's why I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Oh,
Hmm.
that's Robert. Let me ask the next question to you, Cindy. It is the Ukraine war. The U.S. is supporting and aiding to the Ukrainian government against Russia, and it is viewed as a proxy war between U.S. and Russia. Do you think the old days of Cold War are back? That of Vietnam and Afghanistan between U.S. and Russia. Do you believe this theory?
Um, that's actually a good question, but I wouldn't say it was a Cold War because there's, the Cold War was supposedly established after World War II to keep the balance of powers, right? And so, and NATO was instituted to keep the USSR in check. And so after the Afghan war, the US's proxy war against the USSR in Afghanistan, the Soviet Union collapsed but NATO didn't collapse, right? NATO has been encroaching closer and closer and closer and closer to the borders of Russia. So, and they weren't supposed to, that this
Mhm.
was like the agreement that they had. And Stalin, Truman, or was it FDR? I think it was right before FDR died, and Churchill. And so that it definitely is a proxy war. The US has a proxy, another poor, corrupt country that their leadership has signed on to support for their own benefit, the leadership's benefit, right? And they've become the leadership of Ukraine, the leadership of Afghanistan became partners with this demonic entity in Washington, D.C. called the US government against their own people, right? They weren't trying to save their people, it was against their people. And so so the question, what I think it's a new Cold War, I think that there's something the atomic scientists put out, the nuclear devastation. How many minutes are we to nuclear devastation? I don't even think it's a minute anymore. The last time I looked, it was 80 seconds, but I think they took off like 20 seconds. Maybe we're just a minute to midnight, which is nuclear annihilation.
The closest to midnight it's ever been.
Right.
Now, the U.S., while it's supporting Ukraine after, of course, the U.S. overthrew the government of Ukraine a number of years ago, a more pro-Russian government, and established the current government. But the U.S. does have its deadly finger in a number of pies. It has been saber-rattling against the People's Republic of China with the situation, the conflicts with Taiwan. So what is the U.S. trying to accomplish there? What is the goal that the U.S. is doing in China regarding Taiwan, in your view?
To me, it's like the maniacs are in power. And you know, recently my old nemesis Nancy Pelosi, who I ran for Congress against in 2008, she wouldn't stop the war. She wouldn't impeach George Bush for lying, George Bush and Dick Cheney, for lying and manipulating this country into a war that killed thousands of US troops, including my son Casey, and over 1 million Iraqi and Afghan people. And so they're mass murderers. You can't impeach them for lying about mass murdering. But then when Trump came in, they impeached him twice. And I'm still not sure why he got impeached twice. But so then Nancy Pelosi was going on an Asian junket with her son, Paul Pelosi Jr., has jobs, or it's kind of like a situation with Hunter Biden on the board of Burisma in Ukraine. And then all of a sudden, when his dad becomes president, Ukraine gets this influx of cash, of weapons. You know, Zelensky's bragging that BlackRock is going to come in and help rebuild the country. So it's this transfer, it's more money laundering, right? I think the Ukraine situation is this huge money laundering program. And so Nancy Pelosi said she was going to go to Taiwan because Taiwan is big in superconductor and the superconductor business. And I don't know if I'm saying that right, but so her son Paul Pelosi Jr. was on this trip with her. The State Department of the United States and China warned her to not go, but she went anyway. And the United States has longed to keep this balance of power, to keep some kind of, even though there's an imbalance of power militarily, they've had this one China policy that they would support China's claim on Taiwan. And so Nancy Pelosi kind of blew that up. Now, after the train disaster in East Palestine, Ohio, all of a sudden China was sending spy balloons over the United States, which if anybody believes that, you know, they are kind of naive and ignorant to believe something like that. But then the US, I guess, recently flew a plane over China, and China put their forces on what I think we would call a DEFCON 3 or something, on high alert. So I think money laundering, I think profit, I think you know, corruption. The Biden administration is one of the most corrupt administrations we've had here in the United States, has a lot to do with it. And I think also poor Biden, his intellectual abilities are rapidly declining, you know, as he has this onset of Alzheimer's or dementia or something. And so, not that he was a peace guy before he became president at all, but the president is surrounded by these avaricious, what do you call them, advisors. And so we're just in a very precarious situation right now. And the only thing that kept me going until last year was that Putin was showing extreme restraint, and Xi Jinping was showing restraint, but you can only push them so far, and the United States has pushed them too far.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It always does seem to come down to power and profits, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The U.S. government, foreign policy and domestic policy, the goal is to enrich those who are already rich and keep in power those who are already in power, and everyone else has to know their place, and their place is not powerful or wealthy. We see that repeatedly.
Right.
Cindy, the U.S. We've talked a little bit about Israel today. That's a topic I am very interested in, because I'm a strong supporter of Palestine. The U.S. was recently involved in major, what they call, maneuvers with Israel. So how does this help to protect the national security of the U.S.? And if it doesn't, and I don't see how it does, what is the motivation for these military exercises conducted with the apartheid regime of Israel?
Of course, no foreign policy actions of the United States has actually been for self-defense or to secure the security of the United States. You can't see that. Even the most ardent supporters of war have to see that when you invade somebody's country, kill its citizens, destroy its infrastructure, poison it with, you know, depleted uranium and other toxic chemicals, is you're not going to make friends. And I am also a huge supporter of Palestine and a huge opposer of the apartheid Zionist state of Israel. And the connection between the United States and Israel oftentimes is confusing to a lot of people, because it only benefits Israel, right? It does not benefit the United States. I think that oftentimes the people who become radicalized against the United States often cite Israel's treatment of Palestinians and its neighbors, you know, as one of the reasons. And so they oppose the United States because the United States supports Israel. And I don't really think Israel exists. The apartheid government of Israel. And so what's the motivation? What is the motivation actually? And I don't understand the hold that Israel has over the Congress in the United States. There's only a few things that brings the entire Congress together, and one of them is Israel and their support for Israel. And there's like very few dissenters ever.
Why is that so?
Hmm?
Cindy, why is that so?
Well, I think that Israel has a very powerful lobby, but I also think it's infiltrated, with, like, for example, Nancy Pelosi. She hosted, when I ran against her, Zippy Livni. I don't know what her position was in the Knesset, but she was a high ranking politician of Israel. And she hosted her in California. And she said, I have more Jewish grandchildren than you do, because her daughter married a Jewish person, which isn't really supposed to be the mother, not the father that confers Hebrewness on people. But I think that there was a great sob story, and of course Israel suffered during the Holocaust, and not Israel, Jews suffered during the Holocaust. And so there was a drive even before World War II to have a, a separatist state for Jewish people in the Middle East, correct? And many people, I think, almost out of not liking Jews, supported that to get get the Jews out of their country and get them into a certain place. So it's just their extreme support and love, and it's also transferring over to Ukraine and Zelensky, because I've never seen a situation like I don't remember them bringing over Afghan warlords to speak in Congress to and present them with a flag or whatever. It's just an extraordinary collaboration, and we have to see. There's a brilliant documentary. I think it's called The Century of the South, where might be a different documentary, but it shows the rise of Islamic extremism with the rise of Zionism in the United States, with people like Leo Strauss, and then the Project of the New American Century grew out of that. So it's just very deeply ingrained. And I don't think it's all about money and the lobbyists who come. There's some other kind of psychological trauma invested in the US's support of Israel, to the detriment of US citizens. Why not send that $4 billion or part of it to East Palestine to clean up the horrible mess that they made, or thousands of homeless people in the streets here. There's so much suffering now here in the United States as well, that it just seems very difficult for the US to continue to justify its support of places like Israel and Ukraine.
There, as you mentioned, the people in Ohio now who are suffering from the train derailment, people in Flint, Michigan who can't drink their own water that comes out of the tap. Why is the U.S. sending $4 million to a prosperous and
billion dollars, and a country that has single payer health care? Well, in the United States, we don't have single payer health care.
And in a country where university education is extremely inexpensive.
Mm-hmm.
And here,
can I make another point that goes along with what we're saying? I'm sorry, but I'll forget it if I don't make this point. So, right when the train derailed in East Palestine, causing all of this, and I want to say, when I first started seeing that journalists were being beaten up and banned from East Palestine, I thought it was Palestine, because but I never heard of an East Palestine, but when that was happening, Biden made a speech saying that they were going to appropriate more money for Ukraine to pay for their infrastructure, to build schools, to build hospitals, to pay for their social services, and to fund their pensions and stuff like that. So this is stuff that's not even happening here in the United States. And so I don't know if I can cuss, but Trump used to say shithole countries, oh, that's just a shithole country. I'm living in a shithole country right now. And so it's just incredible to me that the people are just like, oh, I don't know how people of East Palestine, so close to Washington, D.C., didn't all just like get in their cars and go to the White House and demand that the federal government pay attention, make the railroad significantly responsible for what happened. Why? Like you said, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. How can you not pay attention when all the birds and fish and your pets are dying right in front of you?
Yeah,
Right.
it's amazing.
Do you think I'm a
Robert,
little stirred up about this?
Yeah, as we all should be.
Yeah, we should
Khawaja,
speak about these issues as you have done. So before we jump to our concluding question, Cindy, I have just a small question to you. It's kind of personal question. What particular challenges you face as a peace activist?
Of course, for the last 3 years, we haven't been able to really the restrictions have lessened, and we haven't been able to travel. We haven't been able to organize. I don't think organizing should be done only via computer or phone calls. I think you have to be present. The last major thing I organized in Washington, D.C. was called Rage Against the War Machine in 2019. And the recent one stole my action. They ghosted.
COVID-19 or global
No, it's
pandemic?
because of COVID. It was because of COVID. It was because of COVID. And so, I couldn't organize. So that was like a big restriction right now. Traveling is extremely difficult right now with issues with the airlines, with the trains and things like that. But also since it's hard to get together personally, it's also hard to get together online because our social media accounts are being erased, they're being blocked, they're being banned. I spent 2021 210 days blocked from Facebook. And if you're not blocked, your posts are like shadow banned. So that's an extreme. Censorship is an extreme issue here. The lack of being able to do personal organizing is a big issue here. And just like we've seen extreme reactions to protests, it frightens a lot of people away from protesting. And those are some of the issues we have in organizing. But it's, to me, the way the U.S. is operating right now, there should be an avalanche of people clamoring to and not just go and protest. You just can't go for one day and essentially have a press conference with influencers and a few 100 people. You have to have dedicated staying power like the truckers did. I don't know if you resonated with them or not. It doesn't really matter. They had dedication, and their dedication was able to make some changes. So, things like that, you really have to dedicate your life, and at least many days or months out of your life, if you think that you're going to even make, with hundreds of thousands of other people, if you think that you're going to make a difference in this situation. Germany's having big protests right now.
Israel
France,
is too.
I super admire France because many years ago, probably like 10 years ago, I was in France, and there were protests because they wanted to raise the retirement age from 60 to 62. And now they're protesting because now they want to raise it to 64. And people are like, see, we told you. And even like young people come out and go, no, we're not affected by it, but our parents and our grandparents are. And when we're that age, we don't want to work till we're like 80 years old, like people in the United States do. We want to be able to retire comfortably and things like that. Protests in Israel, I didn't hear about that.
It's against the legislative changes that Netanyahu was forcing through.
Mm.
But hundreds of thousands of people have been demonstrating in Tel Aviv. There are other reasons they should be demonstrating, but at least it indicates
Right.
some instability of the government, which is a good thing.
Well, and we have 340 million people here in the United States. It's a pretty big country. And, for where I live in California, it's not easy or it's not cheap to get to the seat of power, and these other countries, France and Germany, it's not as hard. Or Israel is even easier in Israel or Palestine.
Right. Yeah. Palestine.
Yeah.
Okay. In closing, Cindy, what are your thoughts about how can peace be brought to the world? What is the solution to everything that's going on now? And I know that you could write books about that, but just kind of in a nutshell.
I think the key, and it's why I like to connect with people like Khawaja and my contacts in Iran and Iraq and Ukraine and places like that, is an international solidarity with oppressed people or people who are under US sanctions. Cuba too. I have a really good relationship with people in Cuba and Venezuela that are also been under sanctions. Is that people to people solidarity. And the United States really, the corporate media and the government, which the media really is just the propaganda arm of the government. There's the legacy media, at least. Also, we're also fortunate, even though social media has a lot of negative attributes, it also has a lot of positive attributes. We can reach independent media like yours and like mine. We can reach more people than we were able to reach before. But then also there's so much. I thought there's more content being processed every day than up until combined, from when it started till today. So anyway, but really the United States is really good about demonizing other people, demonizing. I grew up during the Cold War, and I was the first time I went to Cuba, I was kind of afraid because I had heard that Cuba was a horrible oppressive dictatorship. And when I got there, I found it was the most beautiful, open country that I've ever been to. And so that's what I think is that people are people everywhere. People want the same things. They want peace, they want a little prosperity, and they want security, And so that's why I criticize my government the most, because not my government, the United States government the most, because they're the ones who are the biggest enemies of peace, prosperity, and security.
Okay.
Thank you. The same thing is said about Pakistan, that it is a horrible place, and the same thing that it is said about Afghanistan. But believe you me, Afghanistan is a very beautiful country. Pakistan is a very beautiful country. The people are very nice and hospitable. You should visit Pakistan and Afghanistan. This is a region famous for their hospitality. And thank you, Cindy, for your time.
Thank you so much, Cindy.
Well, thank you. I'm glad we were finally able to work this out.
I am too. Thank you very much for your time. It was great to see you again. And I know our paths will cross again.
I hope so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, audience, for viewing.